Hello there, booktube. How you doing? Today I thought I'd do another Poetry Thursday video. It's not really Thursday anymore. It's just it's gone 12 o'clock now, so it's early Friday morning. But I thought I'd squeeze in one last video this year. Before the new year. And I thought I'd share a poem about the new year and about a Welsh New Year tradition. Since that's where I am, that's where I grew up. So I thought I'd share a bit of that with you. And it's a poem called the Ballad of the Lwyd, and the tradition of the Lwyd. It was something that happened at midnight on New Year's Eve, or I suppose at the very beginning of New Year's Day. And you'd expect a knock on your door, and members of your community will be outside, and so some of them will be wearing, or will be underneath this white sheet. And sticking out the top will be a horse's skull adorned with ribbons and stuff like that. And you'd have like a singing competition. And if the people inside won the competition, then they got to carry on the rest of their evening nice and warm inside. If the people outside, if they won the competition, they'd run in and they'd ransack the house. They'd spill out all the coals from the fire, so you didn't have the fire to warm you anymore. It's quite I suppose a very emblematic, very striking tradition. And even though it's not really practiced, it's not been practiced for a long time in Wales. There have been points in history when it's been banned, because obviously if you're going to be spilling out the coals from a fire, quite often there were cottages that were burned down as a result of this. So it's not really been practiced for a long time, but the image of the Lwyd has kind of stayed around in the Welsh imagination, and she turns up from time to time. And so this is a Welsh poet, Vernon Watkins, and he's just kind of going into this ritual, this tradition, and just kind of playing around with its symbols, I suppose. And it's really hypnotic. At least I find it to be really hypnotic, and I really love it. It goes on for a bit, so I'll just read the beginning really, and then maybe next year I'll read a bit more, and then the year after maybe a bit more, and maybe start off a bit of a tradition there. But yeah, here we go. This is the Ballad of the Lwyd by Vernon Watkins. Lwyd, horse of frost, star horse, and white horse of the sea, is carried to us. The dead return. Those exiles carry her, they who seem holy and have put on corruption, they who seem corrupt and have put on holiness. They strain against the door, they strain towards that fire which fosters and warms the living who have cast them out from their own fear of themselves into the outer darkness of death, rejected them and cast them out forever. The living cringe and warm themselves at the fire, shrinking from that loneliness, that singleness of heart. The living are defended by the rich warmth of the flames which keeps that loneliness out. Terrified, they hear the dead tapping at the panes. Then they rise up, armed with the warmth of the firelight and the condition of scorn. It is New Year's night. Midnight is burning like a taper. In an hour, in less than an hour, it will be blown out. It is the moment of conscience, the living moment, the dead moment. Listen. Midnight, 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 midnight. Hark at the hands of the clock. Now dead men rise in the frost of the stars, and fists on the coffins knock. They dropped in their graves without one sound, then they were steady and stiff. But now they tear through the frost of the ground as heretic, drunkard, and thief. Why should you fear, though they might pass, ripping the stitch of grief? The white sheet under the frosted glass, crisp and still as a leaf. or look through the sockets that once were eyes at the table and white cloth spread. The terrible picklock charities raised the erected dead. Under your walls ignore like mice, virtue is unmasked. The hands of the clock betray your vice, they give what none has asked, for they have burrowed beneath the graves and found what the good gave most, refuse cast by the righteous waves in fossil, wraith and ghost. Chalice and wafer, wine and bread, and the picklock thread. Midnight, 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 hark at the sound of the clock. Good men gone are evil become, and the men that you nailed down and clamped in darkness clamour for rum, and ravish on beds of down the vision your light denied them, laid above the neglected door, and the chattering speech of skull and spade beckons the banished poor. Locked out lepers with halos come, put on the clock is done. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. The breath of a numb thing, loud and faint, something found and lost. The minute drops in the minute glass, conscience counts the cost. What mounted murderous thing goes past the room of Pentecost? Sinner and saints, a horse's head in the frost. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. What shudders free from the shroud so white, stretched by the hands of the clock? What is the sweat that springs in the hair? Why do the knee joints knock? Bones of the night in the naked air knock, and you hear that knock. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. A knock of the sands on the glass of the grave, a knock on the sands of the shore, a knock of the horse's head and the wave, a beggar's knock on the door, a knock of a moth on a pane of light, in the beat of a blood, a knock. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. The sands in the glass, the shrinking sands, and the picklock hands. Midnight, 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 hark at the hands of the clock. So there we go, that's the first few pages of the Ballad of the Mary Lwyd by Vernon Watkins. Yeah, please let me know what you think if you found it interesting. But yeah, for the meantime, I hope you're well, hope you're doing good, and I wish you a very happy new year. For now, that's everything, and I'll see you in 2022. Alright, bye bye.